invite someone who is an entrepreneur, obviously. He is part engineer, part marketeer, part business guy, and most of all, a wonderful human being. He has worked at big companies, he has worked at startups, and finally, he decided to take the plunge and start his own company 2 years ago. And 2 years later, his company was acquired by Google. So ladies and gentlemen, let me invite Mehul Nariabala as our final session speaker, and we'll have a one-on-one chat with him. Thank you, Mehul. Thanks for joining us this evening.
My pleasure.
So let's start at the beginning, Mehul. Okay, so we're speaking to Mehul, and Mehul recently sold his company to Google. So Mehul, let's start at the beginning. So you started Flutter in 2011. What was the inspiration to start the company?
I guess one part is some of the folks here will understand it's part of being good Jew, which has always wanted to start a company. Honestly speaking, it was sort of a perfect storm in the sense that I had been working at a big company. I had worked at a startup which had got acquired by Google in 2010, and I just had enough experience, and I had also met a perfect co-founder, which is actually a hugely important part of the puzzle as well. And it just right place at the right time with the right co-founder, with an understanding that if I didn't do it now, it may not happen, and there is really no right time to start a company. It's usually the right time when you start it.
So when you started Flutter, and you specialize in gesture recognition, now in 2011, Microsoft was already out with Connect, and they had invested tons of money. They had a product out, which people kind of liked. So were you concerned at all about you being not the first to the party?
Actually not. So we started thinking about this idea in 2010. The idea itself came from the perspective that even though Microsoft, and we actually started thinking about it even before Microsoft Connect coming out, and the idea was very simple that, hey, webcams are already ubiquitous. Even in 2010, there were 4 billion devices with built-in webcams. The only thing we really do with it is take pictures or do Skype. So it's probably the dumbest piece of hardware in your phones and laptops, and you don't really do much with it. In fact, there was a study back in 2010 where a lot of people didn't even realize that they had webcams in their own computer. So it was a very interesting point of view, and the concept we had was, hey, as you are moving to, as these cameras are present, they're constantly looking at us. Why can't we start actually building stuff on top of it where we actually give it an intelligence to understand things? And that's where we started thinking about it. And Microsoft and Kinect coming out was actually a great, timing-wise, it was a great thing for us because it validated our idea. For a small company, small entrepreneur trying to go out and kind of talking about an idea with which is very future-oriented, it's very tough initially to sell. And big company jumping into a market actually validates the market and gives investors more of a reason to take a look at you.
So some of us in the audience may not know what Flutter did, so can you
yeah, so Flutter was a gesture recognition startup in computer vision specifically, and we started working on doing gesture recognition on a webcam. And the reason being, as I talked about earlier, there are 4 billion devices with webcam, and we started thinking of it as eye of the machine. And we said, look, if it is the eye of the machine, then why can't I interact with the machine just like I interact with another human being with eyes? And the first step of the process, just like any new language you have to build first alphabets and vocabulary, we thought hand gestures was the essential building blocks that we needed to start with. So that's where we started working on and picked on a very narrow use case. So we have an app that is out on desktop, which you can still download at flutterapp.com, which allows you to control iTunes and Spotify using hand gestures on your Windows or Mac on existing devices. And the idea was to be able to launch this technology, perfect it, understand the user experience very, very early on, and then be able to build on top of it using multiple gestures and multiple facial expression recognitions.
Yeah, so the thing that I remember is that you can say swipe or just a hand gesture and it will skip to the next song.
That's correct.
Go back and forth between the songs that you're listening to,
That's correct, yes.
without actually touching the screen, so.
Touching the screen,
Which is
that's
phenomenal,
correct.
yeah. So,
correct.
so what is the ultimate? So that was one use case that you addressed
Mhm.
for Spotify and the iTunes. But what's the ultimate with gesture recognition?
So gesture recognition specifically is just part of the puzzle, right? The way we thought about it, and I think someone mentioned earlier voice. So whether it's touch, whether it's voice, whether it's gestures, these are different senses of the way we interact as a human beings. And as the computer evolves, we're probably going to interact with all these senses in the right context at the right time. So we don't use gestures all the time to communicate. We don't use voice all the time to communicate. In a similar way, we don't use touch all the time to communicate. Right situation dictates right type of interaction model. And in the same way, up till now, we've been limited to keyboard and mouse. Now we have touch. So then the next set of senses that are obviously coming are voice and gestures and interaction. And what we will see in future is a combination of all three at a right point in time to work. And the model that we always thought of, which is probably still 5-10 years away, was this idea of R2D2 of Star Wars, that you have a computer in your room and it's understanding everything about you. And you're seeing this with a bunch of apps like Tempo AI or Google Now, where your cloud data is already getting understood and computer knows what you want to do or what time you may be going home. Well, now add a voice and gestures on top of it, and you can ask it, hey, what should I do right now, or where do I go home? And you're seeing some of these early use cases coming out of Google, Apple, all the big companies, and we think that's the way interactions are going.
So I'm personally fascinated by the possibility of augmented reality, where let's say you can combine Google Glass with sensors that recognize your gestures to manipulate real world objects. So how far away do you think we are from that kind of possibility? So first question. Second is, do you think it is more of a technological hurdle or social hurdle from us?
So I'll answer the second question first and then give you the first answer. The second question is it's really a technological hurdle. The reason is very simply that you cannot keep a camera on your mobile device all the time or you'll run out of battery. Same thing with voice. That's why Google has on the Motorola phone, OK Google as a keyword to turn on some of the information. So battery and actually CPU resources on your phones are two limiting factors right now. So believe it or not, technology is still very, very behind at the core level for it to happen. And there were some other debate about HTML5 versus native API early on. And what you realize is that HTML5 didn't work because of latency. Even though it was a milliseconds of latency, it just didn't work. In a similar way, the reason experience on Siri sucks beyond that it just doesn't work is once you say something, it takes about 2 seconds for it to actually even figure it out. So latency is so high that experience is just not great. So until you can fix a latency problem both on voice as well as gestures and build devices that are powerful enough to absorb all the information all the time and quickly process it, this is still a problem that's far away actually. And so based on that, I feel that this is still 4 to 5 years away until someone figures out a very, very efficient batteries and CPU chips. And in terms of social, honestly speaking, earlier there was conversation about creepy as well, and I feel like creepy is a definition that is evolving because what is creepy to us is very different than what is creepy to a 14-year-old, and it's actually much less creepy. So in a funny way, that definition is evolving, and what we found out, and this is one of the most interesting things we did, which is we launched with one gesture on a Hacker News with one line of code, like literally one line saying that here's an app, download, and we had 10,000 downloads in 2 days. And the things that we wanted to test was one, which is, did we get the user experience right? And we immediately got that answer because of the amount of downloads and the feedback we were getting. And two, we just wanted to see if people were okay with keeping cameras on all the time. And surprisingly enough, everyone was okay with it. And I tend to think of it as a four-square problem, which is as soon as you provide value to people, people are much more willing to give up information. And same thing happened on camera, where people were not only okay with it, but we got more emails saying that, can you turn off the annoying green light, but keep camera on, than actually, were concerns about privacy.
Now, this was a tough problem that you were trying to solve, because this is not just writing software, this is deep gesture recognition, and you had, four PhDs on your team? what did you tell these guys to come and join you and stay with you when Valley is so hard and hiring and retaining talent is so tough? So what do you tell these guys to come on board?
So first, giving credit where credit is due. It's good to have your good co-founder, and my co-founder is actually one of the pioneer in computer vision, probably top 5 guy in the world. And his PhD thesis has more than, to those of you guys who understand this, his PhD thesis has 7,000 citations. PageRank has 10,000 citations. So you guys have to understand that this is like one of the foundation object detection algorithm. So having that is number one, very useful. And then number two is really just finding people who are passionate about problems that you are solving. So in order to find 4 of these guys or 3 additional guys beyond my co-founder, we must have gone through about 400 different PhD candidates. And specifically the way we found them is we literally looked at we picked top 10 computer vision schools in the world and looked at every single PhD who had graduated within 2 years plus minus of us starting our company. And we systematically contacted one whom we thought may be interested in that and who we thought were smart. And some folks responded, and then we showed them the demo. And the idea of working with such a groundbreaking problem was far more interesting to them than actually, getting a high salary. So that helps a lot.
So when you started the company, did you have a clear view of what the business was going to be, or was it more of that you were passionate about solving the problem? This was more of a technology play. You said, what the heck, let me just go and solve the problem and worry about the business later. And
So the answer to the question is we knew that technology problem needs to be solved, that there hasn't been any progress in computer vision and object detection in a long, long while, and we had an opportunity to solve that. So technologically, we knew there was an opportunity. We started thinking about this in 2010, so our thought was that in 3 years, market would evolve quite a bit. The answer is it has evolved, but not to the level that we thought it would. So sometimes timing is very important, and we thought we would be able to monetize in many different ways, including interactive video ads and things like that. But the interesting portion is always that market catches up when it's sort of ready to catch it up, and there's so many factors involved. And I'm sitting here in 2013, and I think it's still 3 years away. So yeah, it's hard to predict when the market catches up.
so let's change gears a little bit. So you were at Google when you started Flutter.
Correct.
And you came to Google through the acquisition of Like.com, which
Correct.
in itself is a very fascinating story, and how they transformed from Ria.com to Like.com, which was acquired by Google for $100 million. So, but I heard there is an interesting story behind how you ended up at Like.com. So tell us about that story.
Yeah, so everyone has their own strengths that they really think about, and I always felt that mine was finding a way to get into the door. So back in the days, if you guys are familiar, Ria.com was one of the first companies to launch on TechCrunch. Actually, one of the first company to work on facial recognition in the Valley in 2005, which was very, very early times for computer vision. And I remember reading a lot about it. Our founder, Munjal Shah, CEO, had a really good blog, which I was following, and I wanted to work in a heavy technology company. Just computer vision fascinated me. So I sent him 3 or 4 emails to see if I could get in a coffee with him, and he never responded. And then one day I read a blog post that said, hey, we just acquired a domain name like.com. And the way we acquire domain is there's a guy in Los Altos who owned the domain. He wouldn't respond to our phone calls or emails. So our VP of BizDev jumped the fence of his house, left a bottle of wine and a note on his porch, and the guy called back next day and bought the domain. So I thought that was a great story. So next day I showed up with a bottle of wine and a note from Munjal and left it at RIA offices, just complete cold check-in. And he sent me an email saying that, clever, you at least got my attention, let's meet up for lunch. So then we got together for lunch, and that's how I ended up at Like.com.
So how was the experience when you went to Google the first time after having worked at a startup?
Google is an incredible, incredible company for a few reasons. One is it's probably the best company in the world in terms of how they treat their employee. I genuinely believe that if you work at Google right out of your college, you have no idea what real world is. because it's really an amazing. Seeing the amount of talent that's inside that company is quite spectacular and amazing. The genuine talent, genuinely smart people that work there, who care to actually build great products and want to do something. It's just phenomenal. And there's obviously challenges of growing too fast and growing big really at a real rapid pace. And when I joined in 2010, I felt like company was a place where a lot of things were happening, but there wasn't any cohesion. And I was lucky enough to be there when Larry Page took over. And Larry Page laid out this entire plan, and I think him or Sergey summarized that, hey, at Google we've let 1,000 flowers bloom, now we're gonna actually build a bouquet. And even after leaving Google, the great part was actually watching that happen, where in the last 2-3 years, I'm sure every one of us has experienced Google services becoming quite cohesive, UI becoming quite consistent. The services and the software actually has become incredibly better, in some cases, beating Apple hands down in some of the services they're providing. So that's very exciting to see. And yeah, coming back and working in that company to help that is exciting itself.
So when you're working on Flutter, and 2 years into it, or a year and a half into it, okay, so take a step back. So many of us entrepreneurs, so when we start a company because we have some idea and we're passionate about it, we start building the company, we hire the team, we raise money, we build the product, we start getting revenue. But most of the times, we face a situation where there is a fork in the road. Either we can continue or we can look for exit. So was there a fork in the road for you, and how do you navigate that and get to?
Absolutely. It was an interesting 6 months, I think, from February to time we got acquired in October. There were 6 months that were very interesting because a lot of interest started coming from outside, from technology standpoint, because everyone had seen the product that we had released. Our app actually was #1 overall free app in 70 different countries on Mac App Store with 3 different gestures. So it was first app of its kind to become so popular. So we had started getting a lot of interest, and at that point, one of the things that resonated with us is this concept that actually Ben Horowitz and Andreessen Horowitz was one of our investors, and Ben had written this blog post that as an entrepreneur, you only have a shot at making one idea successful one time. Versus as an investor, we can invest in the same idea again and again, because some ideas are just waiting for the right time. And his entire example of his own company, which is LoudCloud, and he kept talking about how LoudCloud was essentially Amazon AWS 10 years too early. And that's the point that we were thinking about, that we had the technology, we had the capability to keep building on top of it. The discussion of when the market would be right was the hardest one to figure out. And we kept doing a lot of evaluation around it. So that was one portion, which is when. And being able to survive until that market catches up is pretty tough, especially in an environment where everyone expects 20 million users on your mobile app in about 2 days. So that's these crazy expectations are very hard to figure out. So that was one, timing of when the world would be ready for gestures. And then the second part was ultimately what we were building was interaction model, which has to be part of a platform, which has to be built into a platform. And we essentially had all the major platforms coming after us at the same time. So then if we reject all of them, then whom do we partner with? So those were a couple of things that made a key decision very, very easy for us to say that, okay, it might be a right time to go and do this internally, because once you get inside, and as part of Google, we don't have to worry about staying alive and keeping the finances going. We have enough resources to keep working on it for another 2-3 years until market catches up.
And was there any oh shit moment in the journey?
Yeah, I think the part that was amazing was as an entrepreneur, you build a product, you build a technology, and the best thing is when it gets into the hands of users. And I remember us launching this one app with one gesture that we knew had tons of issues and tons of false positives. And we launched an app on Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. with one line on Hacker News. and it just took off. And we were #1 story on Hacker News for I think day and a half. And it just, the feedback kept coming and comments kept coming and email inbox and support was on fire. And there is no other feeling than actually seeing users use it and loving it and constant feedback. That's the highest of the high, and that was amazing to see. And that was the moment where we were like, oh shit, we actually have figured something out.
That was a good oh shit moment, which all of us hope that we
Yeah.
have those moments in our
Yes.
startup life.
Yeah.
So what's next for Mehul?
Same stuff. Gestures is still very early. Computer vision is still very early. And now that we are inside Google, there is Android, there is Chrome. We have a lot of opportunity to embed some of our technology into that platforms and actually bring it to much more users than we were able to get into independently. So that's the exciting part. And this particular technology in this particular space is just heating up. That I'm sure you guys have heard. Prime Sense getting acquired by Apple. So I think it's still in the process of getting started, and we're excited about what we can do from inside, continuing on the same stuff.
So any words of wisdom for some budding entrepreneurs here who might be afraid of taking the plunge? So maybe they are more encouraged, more motivated?
Well, there are 2-3 things I'll tell you. One is, a lot of people keep asking me when is the right time or is the decision to quit your job when you have a wife, 2 kids, and a home and a mortgage, a good one. And the answer to the question is it's never a logical decision. It's a decision you should never take unless that's the only decision you have to take, because that's the only thing you can think about. So if you're looking for logical answers, you're not going to get any. Sorry. The other thing is, I'll tell you the story about a great investor who I won't name, who became our advisor investor and was significantly helpful throughout the process. He was a friend of, brother-in-law of a friend, and he had started 3 companies before, sold 3 companies before. He's on to his 4th company. And I remember that every time we met at my friend's kid's birthday party, I would try to engage him, and he would rarely connect with me. And I was like, you know what, I can't get through that guy. And then I quit Google, started Flutter, and then I happened to go to this friend's kid's birthday party again, and I saw him, and I'm like, hey, I just quit Google and I started Flutter. And he's like, hold on. And then he turns around and he says, look, give me 2 minutes. And then he turns around and says, look, I know you've been trying to talk to me for 5 years, but on a given week, I meet about 500 people who actually want to start a company, and I meet about 2 who actually starts company, so I pay attention to the 2. So now if you've started it, I'll talk to you. So that's the kind of thing that is actually very, very hard decision. But I don't think, it was very agonizing to take that decision, but once I quit, I knew it was the right decision. And over the years, I've learned that decisions are never right or wrong. It's usually what you do after taking the decision that makes them right or wrong. So, there is a saying in NFL, some NFL quarterback used to say that a pat in the back is 2 inches away from slap on the face. So now that company's acquired, it's great. But if it wasn't, I'm sure I would have been called an idiot. So it's okay. You just have to be ready for either of those possibilities.
So let me open up the floor for a few questions if anyone has. So Mehul.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, and you just spoke about prime sense, right?
Yeah.
So the gut feeling is that, if you were to look at the teardown reports of the latest iPhone, you got the M7 design, it's from NXP.
Mm-hmm.
And it basically collects a lot of physical information from the accelerometer, the
Yep.
camera, what have you.
Yep.
So marrying the hardware and this piece of software, Shruti brought that up, and he kind of shied away from the question. I noticed that. What is that going to, how is that going to play out, vis-a-vis what you guys have? If you don't want to come in from a Google standpoint, a personal standpoint.
No, I think that's where Google's very exciting, so is Apple, because they do have opportunities where they can build their own hardware. And in some cases like this, there will be a hardware possibility that has to happen. Apple's direction of M7 chip is the right one, because our vision was always that you will see, just like there is a CPU and then there is a GPU which was driven for massive parallelization for gaming, We think that there will be quote unquote, NPU, which is neural processing unit, which collects data around your cloud signals, your voice signals, your accelerometer, your gestures, or whatever webcam is looking at, and processes these things very, very fast. And current CPUs and current GPUs are really not optimized for that sort of processing. So what happens is if you're building algorithms, well, your algorithms are limited by this hardware. So at some point, this is the right step to move forward. That said, the underlying key problem is still making them efficient enough to survive full day of continuously being on, which is something that obviously Google Glass struggles with and has about 4 hours of battery life, as everyone probably knows. And so it's the same thing that Apple will have to solve at some point as well. But I'm sure they're capable of solving that. Yes.
Can you take us through your journey of how you started funding and sort of growth? It's a very future-looking idea.
Sure.
You had a premier venture firm back to you, but maybe before that and after that.
Sure. So we started thinking about this in 2010, and this was when our Light.com company wasn't acquired yet, and we were thinking about it. And I know my co-founder Navneet actually did not join Google. He quit right after Light.com and started working on this. And in those early days prior to Kinect, actually, it was very, very hard to go to investors and get anyone interested in it simply because they thought idea was impossible. So at that point, we realized that we have to actually first build working prototype to even get somewhere. So that was the first part of the puzzle. The second was actually building your vision and understanding where you want to go. And that second part was critical. And then third part was finding, at some point, investors is also, for lack of a better way of saying it, also a numbers game. You have to find people who believe in the vision that you're talking about. You have to get to certain people who are interested in the kind of technology. And we got lucky because Mark Anderson actually believes in gestures technology in general. So from what we heard, we were the only seed pitch meeting that he's ever attended. So, but it's because he's interested. And then, Nawal Ravikant has this awesome saying where he says that, if you're a first-time entrepreneur trying to get seed funded, your funding round will feel like it's not going anywhere until all of a sudden you're funded. And that's what sort of happened where, Anderson Horowitz came in, and then within a week we were funded. And I remember asking Anderson and Mark specifically that, hey, why don't you invest more? Because they have this rule that they only invest 100K in seeds, a very standard thing. And he said, but why? Just go and tell people that we invested and you'll get funded. Which was pretty funny, but yeah. So some of it is luck, and the other portion is your network does matter. For us, it took us about 3 months to raise seed round, and I remember that about 2 months of it was actually just getting the meetings. So finding right connections to get the right intros, and right intros do matter, and in some cases even multiple intros before someone would respond and say, okay, I'm willing to take you, hear what you have to say.
Mehul, it was wonderful talking to you, and wish you good luck with this phase of journey and whatever comes after this, which I'm looking forward to.
Sounds great. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Tadim